My name is Ethan Cole. I'm 38 now, but I'll never forget the moment I was fired like a spectacle, not for performance, not for misconduct, but as a cheap punchline in front of a boardroom full of smug men in suits. I was 32 then, director of operations at Crestwell & Lane, a mid-size logistics firm in Denver. 6 years in, I was the guy who held it all together: crisis management, back-end strategy, vendor relations, not flashy, not loud, just effective, and apparently invisible enough to be disposable. It happened on a Thursday. I remember the smell of cheap coffee in paper cups and the fake laughter echoing off the glass walls of the conference room. We were in a quarterly wrap-up meeting, and the CEO, Graham Vickers, was on a roll. He loved an audience, especially when that audience included 2 VCs he was courting for a new funding round. "We're trimming fat," he said with a smirk, "making bold moves, even letting go of some legacy roles that no longer serve our forward vision." He turned to me. "Ethan, thanks for your time. Today's your last day." I thought it was a joke, a stunt, a bizarre motivational tactic. But when the HR director slid a manila envelope across the table without meeting my eyes, I knew it was real. I didn't ask questions. I didn't argue. I didn't give him the reaction he wanted. I just stood up, buttoned my blazer, nodded once, and said, "Noted." That was it. No shouting, no drama, just quiet clarity. But inside, I made a promise. I would never be disposable again. And one day, he'd know just how permanent my absence really was. I left with no fanfare, no severance celebration, just the echo of my own footsteps down a hallway I had once memorized. My phone buzzed with Slack messages from coworkers. "WTF just happened? You okay?" I ignored them all, because in that moment, something clicked. I wasn't going to look for a new job. I was going to build something that made Graham regret ever speaking my name. Not out of rage, but out of precision. I spent the next 2 years in the shadows, freelancing, consulting, studying financial structuring and shell acquisition deals. I lived simply, no vacations, no splurges, and stacked every dollar like it was ammunition. I watched Crestwell's moves from a distance. Every PR stunt, every investor pitch. I saw through it all. The company was bloated, drowning in ego, and one recession away from collapse. That's when I started forming my plan. And in the 3rd year, when the market finally dipped and the firm's stock bottomed out, an acquisition firm swooped in. A quiet buyer, a faceless group. No one knew it was me, not even Graham, but the purchase went through. The name changed, and suddenly I was the man behind the curtain, walking the halls of the company that once laughed me out the door. 3 years can change everything. Not just your bank account or your title, but your eyes, the way you see people, the way you move through rooms that once made you shrink. When I stepped into that building again, no one recognized me. The receptionist was new. The staff was mostly different. And Graham, he had no clue who the real buyer behind the acquisition was. The firm had been absorbed, renamed, and gutted from the inside, all under a holding company I controlled from a quiet office 2 states away. I didn't walk in with a camera crew or announcement. I didn't need an audience. I requested a visitor pass just like anyone else. The new signage read, Redbridge Capital Group, a name that meant nothing to Graham, but everything to me. My name wasn't on the front door. It was buried in the acquisition paperwork, protected by legal insulation. Layers of ownership designed to keep me invisible until I didn't want to be. I asked for a tour, professionally, politely. The young operations manager escorted me through the departments like I was a potential investor. I nodded, asked thoughtful questions, took mental notes, and then we reached the corner office. Glass walls, polished wood, high-end espresso machine, Graham's lair. He was on a call, pacing. His voice hadn't changed. Still sharp, still arrogant. He waved at us through the glass, eyes scanning me like I was just another man in a suit. But something flickered. A hesitation. A pause in his speech. I watched the exact moment he saw my face and registered a familiar outline he couldn't quite name. "I know that guy," his eyes said. But he didn't know how. I gave him a small nod. No smirk, no signal, just a look that said, "I'm not who you remember. I'm who you underestimated." That night, I sat in the top floor of a boutique hotel, overlooking the city where he fired me, mocked me, humiliated me, and now answered to me, even if he didn't know it yet. I opened my laptop and reviewed the upcoming staff restructuring files. Graham's name sat on the list, not under terminated, not yet, but marked for review. With one keystroke I could end it. But I didn't, not yet. I wanted him to feel what I felt, the unease, the uncertainty, the quiet air before the storm, the sound of chairs moving around him while he stood still. Because sometimes revenge isn't about slamming the door, it's about letting them hear it close, slowly, from the inside. A week later, Graham still didn't know, and that was the point. He showed up in meetings, pitching strategies, firing off buzzwords like he still had control. But there were signs. The floor plan had changed. The boardroom had new faces. And when he received a company-wide email announcing a leadership restructuring initiative, I heard from an inside source that he didn't sleep that night. I let him swim in it. That slow, creeping anxiety that something bigger was shifting, and he wasn't at the center of it anymore. The man who once stood at the head of the table firing people for sport now sat quietly during executive reviews, taking notes instead of giving orders. He had started to feel it irrelevance. And that, for men like Graham, is worse than failure. I waited until the Friday before his contract review to schedule a private call with him. I used a proxy, an associate in Redbridge's legal division. She was sharp, calm and vague by design. She told him the board had some questions about the sustainability of his vision and that they wanted to hear directly from him next week. No accusation, no threat, just enough to let the fear grow in the dark. That evening, I got a text from an old colleague. "Graham's panicking. He thinks he's being replaced." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Every move I made had been silent, strategic. I didn't raise my voice. I raised the stakes. While he focused on being loud, I learned to be undeniable. And then something interesting happened. He called me, not realizing who I really was. He called my holding firm's number listed on the acquisition paperwork and asked to speak to someone high up about his concerns. My assistant patched the call through. I didn't say my name. I just listened as he described himself, his achievements and his confusion about the new direction. When he finished, I asked one question. "Do you remember firing someone named Ethan Cole?" There was a pause, a long, awkward pause that turned into breathing. Then, I'm not sure, I leaned in. "You did it on a Thursday, conference room 3B. In front of 2 investors," said I was legacy fat. The silence that followed was suffocating. I could hear the realization hit him like thunder. "Ethan," he whispered. "You bought—" "No," I interrupted, cool and clear. "I built. You just happened to be standing on the property when I arrived." The next board meeting wasn't held in the usual glass-walled conference room. It was moved to a private off-site location, a space I selected intentionally. No nameplates, no hierarchy. Just one long table and silence. So heavy it made men like Graham sweat before a word was spoken. He arrived late, of course, trying to posture. But when he walked in and saw me at the far end of the table, seated quietly, flanked by the new executive team, he froze mid-step. He didn't sit right away. He stood there for a second too long, like someone trying to convince themselves they still belonged. His face said everything: confusion, then realization, then a slow, bitter recognition. I didn't flinch. I didn't offer a smile. I just gave him the same silence he once offered me, not out of spite, but because it was earned. When he finally took his seat, the room didn't greet him with small talk. This time, no one leaned in to laugh at his jokes. No one asked about his strategy. They waited for me. And when I spoke, I did it the same way I built my revenge: slow, calm, surgical. "We're restructuring not just departments," I said, "but leadership philosophy. Loud no longer means strong, fast doesn't mean smart, and power," I paused, "is no longer defined by who speaks first." His mouth tightened. He knew what was coming, but he still tried. "I built this company's identity," he said. "You can't deny what I've done for Crestwell." I leaned forward. "You're right. You built a company around ego. I rebuilt it around value, and now you work for the structure you once mocked." His jaw locked, but he didn't speak again. I handed out new contracts that day. Everyone at the table got theirs, except him. I watched as they opened packets, flipped pages, nodded in approval. And Graham? He just sat there, waiting for a document that wasn't coming. One executive leaned over and whispered, "Did you not get yours?" I turned and said, plain as air, "Graham's role has been absorbed." No drama, no debate, just truth, delivered with the weight of a decade. He didn't fight it. What could he say? Everything had been done legally, cleanly, quietly. His name wasn't even needed on the org chart anymore. He had become what he once accused me of being: obsolete. He stood up, slowly, eyes scanning the room for someone to save him. But no one moved. No one stopped him. And when he reached the door, he turned once, trying to find words that would give him back his place. "Why didn't you just destroy me when you had the chance?" he asked. I looked him in the eye. "Because destruction's too easy," I said. "I wanted you to watch what real building looks like." Graham didn't slam the door. He didn't throw papers or curse or cause a scene. That would have meant he still had power in the room. But when he left like a shadow slipping off a wall, barely noticed, entirely forgotten. The same man who once raised his voice to strip me of my dignity now walked out, carrying his silence like a sentence. No applause, no send-off. Just the weight of irrelevance. After he was gone, I sat alone in that room for a while, not to celebrate, just to breathe. I ran my fingers along the smooth edge of the table, the kind I wasn't allowed to sit at years ago. I thought about the words he said to me the day he fired me. "We need visionaries, Ethan, not old ideas." And yet it was the man with the old ideas who quietly replaced every nameplate in that building. But this wasn't revenge, not anymore. This was reclamation. I didn't rebuild Crestwell just to get even. I rebuilt it to mean something. I started meeting with the staff, one floor at a time. People who had been undervalued, dismissed, talked over. I asked questions. I listened, and slowly, the culture changed. Not because I demanded it, but because I led with the power Graham never understood. Humility backed by results. One afternoon, I passed by Graham's old office. The lights were off. The nameplate was gone, and inside, the space had been repurposed into a mentorship hub for rising managers. A whiteboard with ideas, a bookshelf stacked with leadership books, a small note on the door. "Every great leader remembers what it feels like to be invisible." I didn't sign it. I didn't need to. A week later, I received a letter, handwritten, no return address. Just one sentence: "I never saw you coming." I folded it once, and slipped it into my drawer. I wasn't keeping it for nostalgia. I was keeping it as proof that silence, when paired with strategy, is the most devastating force in the world. This was no longer about proving him wrong. It was about proving me right. About showing the world that the man they once overlooked had become the very thing no one expected. The architect of everything they thought would collapse. 3 months after Graham disappeared from the building, the final trace of his legacy was gone. His outdated systems replaced. His bloated contracts dissolved. His name scrubbed from the archive like chalk from a whiteboard. But this wasn't erasure, it was evolution. The company he left behind was unrecognizable now, leaner, sharper, driven by vision, not volume. And every part of it had been rewritten without a single raised voice. One morning, I stood in the main hallway watching a young analyst lead a strategy meeting in the very room where I was fired years ago. I didn't interrupt. I didn't make an announcement. I just watched. She presented with confidence, her team hanging on every word, and I thought to myself, this is it. Not the moment they applaud you, the moment they don't even know you were once the man no one believed in. I walked past the glass conference room where I was humiliated. Now it was named after someone else. Not me, not Graham, but a former employee who gave everything without recognition. That's how I wanted it. Quiet honors, no shrines, no revenge tours, just a legacy built from respect, not fear. People sometimes ask why I didn't go public with the story, why I never gave interviews, why I let the man who tried to humiliate me fade without retaliation. The answer is simple, because revenge ends when the room claps. But impact? That echoes forever. Graham wanted noise. I became the silence that changed everything. A year after the acquisition, I received a message from someone in his circle. Graham was living on the outskirts of town, consulting part-time, mostly forgotten, no flame-out, no headlines, just gone. The same way he thought I'd disappear. And that's when I knew I had won, not by out-shouting him, but by outlasting him. Now when I walk into my office, I don't see walls. I see proof that you can be broken without staying broken, that you can be erased and then rewrite the entire script, that silence, when sharpened by purpose, becomes the loudest story of all. If you made it this far, drop a tear in the comments and share this with someone who's building in silence, because sometimes the best revenge is never needing to say a word.